And rolling in is our Name to Fame telecast called Chit Chat with Manoj. The host himself is pretty famous, and he is none other than the CEO of Caesar Productions, Mr. Manoj Singh. Interestingly, Caesar Productions held its karaoke competition not too long back. We will broadcast the winners in a few weeks. While in the realm of music, this morning Mr. Singh brings alongside him a refined musician of this area, Mr. Sriram Gopal. Let's connect with him.
Welcome to Chit Chat with Manoj. I am Manoj Singh. Hello, Adab, Namaste. Today we are going to interview Sriram Gopal. He's a contemporary jazz and rock drummer from our area. A thing I always was fascinated about growing up in my college. There was a band. Always looked up to the drummer, and so it will be very interesting. Let's hear more from him about it. He's from Maryland. He spends his day in Washington area as an environmental analyst. He has appeared at the Millennium Stage, at the Kennedy Center, Blues Alley, Twins Jazz, and DC Jazz Festival. In addition to his musical talents, he organizes a collective that employs art as a tool to build safe community spaces for local South Asians. He has a band, the Fourth Stream Band, and which performs regularly at the Bosa Cafe in Adams Morgan. So, thank you, Sriram, for coming on my show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us more about your background and when did you develop a passion for music, and was it in your family?
Well, my parents aren't musicians, but they're great music enthusiasts, and they signed me up for violin lessons when I was very young, probably 5 or 6 years old. I hated it, and then I finally convinced them to let me play the drums around 12 or 13, and I've been playing ever since. I played in band and orchestra through high school, and in college I played in the jazz ensembles at the University of Maryland, and I've been playing semi-professionally for close to 20 years.
That's nice. And so growing up when you were playing those drums, where were you playing those drums? Because the neighbors and the parents, were they plugging in, or?
So I actually asked my parents shortly after college, what were they thinking when they said, okay, this 13-year-old boy can play drums. And my mom said, you know those commercials that used to say it's 5 o'clock, do you know where your child is? My mom always knew exactly where her child was, because there was quite a racket coming out of the basement.
That's a good cause. So why contemporary jazz and rock genre?
Well, I mean, it's my music. My parents played a lot of Carnatic music around the house and bhajans and things like that, but I listened to what was on the radio, and that was on the rock music was what was on the radio. And towards the end of high school and into college, I started improvising more, and jazz is a very improvisational genre of music, and I enjoy improvising. So
so I've gone to a couple of jazz festivals, one in Montreal and recently in Iowa.
Okay.
I don't know much about it, but it's got to do with something with the music, and what's the little bit of background on jazz, like how did it start?
Well, I mean, it's America's kind of one of America's great art forms. It was born in this country. It's only about 100 years old, so it's still evolving rapidly. I would say for someone to start getting into jazz, the key is to just have patience and go see it live. It's much easier to connect with the musicians when you're seeing it live than when you're listening to it on an album. And basically what you're listening for is the interaction between the musicians. So there's usually a framework within which you're working, but it's all about listening to what the other musicians are doing and reacting to that within the given framework.
Nice. So what's the scene in DC and your experience at Bosa Cafe, and what do you enjoy the most?
So DC has an excellent jazz scene. It's small, but it punches above its weight. There are a lot of great musicians that have come out of here. Going back to the great Duke Ellington, he's a DC native, but to this day, there's so many talented musicians. And now with New York being so expensive, a lot of them stick around. New York still is the mecca for jazz, but I have plenty of friends within the community that they'll go to New York and play on a Friday and Saturday, or they'll tour with other musicians, but they stick around in the DC area to, have families, own a house and things like that.
Yeah, there's a theater in Bethesda which has become a jazz place now. They've converted it to a jazz.
Yeah, the Bethesda Blues and Jazz.
Blues and Jazz.
Yeah, supper club.
auditorium,
Yeah, it's a beautiful venue. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, who were your music influences in US growing up?
Well, the first music I listened to was that of the Beatles. When I was young, my uncle gave me a record, an actual record. I still remember those, and that kind of was the first music that I really got passionate about. And then just the music, the rock and pop music that was popular in the 80s. So bands like The Police, Rush, the stuff you heard on the radio. DC 101, which is still around, still one of my favorite radio stations. So,
Correct.
yeah.
I still remember Beatles growing up, and a lot of bands after that, ABBA, and So tell us about your band, Fourth Stream, and the different dhuns you play. And I heard some of that, and it's great.
So the reason it's called the Fourth Stream is there was a movement in jazz in the 70s called the Third Stream, which incorporated Western classical with American jazz. And my concept was, well, if you start incorporating other forms of music from around the world, then you've entered the Fourth Stream. So the idea is that there's no influence, no sound that doesn't fit in the Fourth Stream. And it's just a matter of bringing those sounds together in an organic way where it doesn't sound like you're just plopping influences on top of one another. You're trying to make it like a soup where you can't taste each individual ingredient, but as a whole, it works as a piece.
So I have an interesting question, and this is personal. Whenever someone says jazz, I don't know why the image of saxophone comes to my mind. Is it one of the key instruments?
It is. I mean, it's a foundational instrument for jazz. So I would say the key instruments traditionally were piano, bass, drums, saxophone, trumpet, trombone, and then eventually guitar. So those are kind of and clarinet. So you can keep going, but it is one of the foundational instruments in jazz. So. It's only reasonable that one would associate the instrument with it.
Yeah, interesting. So during the day you're an analyst, environmental analyst, and evenings and weekends your passion is music. Do they all complement each other?
I don't know if complement is the right word. One definitely subsidizes the other. So this album that I put out is self-financed, and that money has to come from somewhere, and my day job is where it comes from.
Okay.
So.
Okay. That's the way I'm an IT analyst in the daytime, but evenings and weekends I do entertainment shows and all that. So what goes through your mind? Another interesting thing I always feel like, and as an actor, or even when I'm going on the stage, what is going through your mind before a performance?
Before a performance, I'm just trying to stay relaxed. During a performance, the thing I'm most focused on is just listening as closely as I can to what the other musicians are doing. There's kind of a continuum. When you start playing, you are worried about the technique, and the goal is to develop enough technique where you don't have to worry so much about that. You can just concentrate on listening and reacting to what's going on around you. And the master musicians are further along that continuum than I am, but I'm probably further along that continuum than a 14-year-old who's just picked up a pair of sticks.
Yeah, I do not know much about jazz, like but I said, it sounds good, and I do sit and listen and close my eyes and feels good. I was listening to your Bengali dhun,
Yeah.
and explain to a layman like how, I mean, do you do your own composition or lyrics, or how you came about it?
Well, I do compose. I did not compose that tune. That's a traditional Bengali folk song that actually my guitarist Rob Colton, he learned it from one of his teachers. I'm not exactly sure how he came to know it, but we've always played it. And my friend Samir Qadri, who's a very talented Hindustani classical vocalist, he sang the vocals on that song. And so it just became this, the way I approached it was to approach it as a classical piece, but with the drum set. So I'm thinking in the correct thal. I'm trying to be supportive in that sense, but it's a Bengali folk tune played with Western instruments. That's all it is.
Very
So-
interesting.
So I don't think of it as fusion so much as
It's creative.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah.
creative. Recently, a movie was submitted to me. A gentleman in U.S. tried Carnatic music on trumpet
yeah
for the first
yeah.
time.
And there's a
Yeah.
ton of that
Correct.
going on
Yeah.
these days. I mean, I'm old enough where it was when I was growing up, it was kind of hard to find teachers in traditional Indian music, but people even 5-6 years younger than me grew up studying Carnatic music or sitar or some kind of Indian classical instrument, and just because the opportunity was there. So.
Nice, very nice. So, do you ever feel like that hopefully one day I can transition into a full-time musician?
I mean, that dream is always there. This is an improvisational instrumental album, so I have no delusions about any kind of commercial potential unless I get really lucky somehow. But if I'm willing to get lucky, that's for sure. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, a drummer always fascinated. I don't know for what reason, but it feels good. And so, how was your experience performing at the Kennedy Center, Millennium Stage?
So I've done that several times with not only my group but with other groups as well, and it's a wonderful stage to play on. I mean, it sounds fantastic. You always have a good crowd to play in front of. The Kennedy Center, they are the pinnacle of professionalism when it comes to a venue. Like, you just show up, set up. The sound technicians know exactly what they're doing. So it's just a really easy day.
I performed there in a play, just Ne Lahore Nahi Dekha Janmya Nahi.
Yeah.
And you're right. I still have that badge. They give you a security badge
Yeah.
for every artist.
Yeah.
I can keep it in my drawer.
Yeah.
As a memento or whatever. So, do you give music lessons, or do you teach?
I have taught. There's a center in Adams Morgan called the Patricia Sitar Center for the Arts, and it's for it's an after-school program for disadvantaged kids, and I taught there for 3 semesters. Unfortunately, just with my schedule, I couldn't continue it. But
So, it's time to wrap up. Here's the camera. What would you like to tell the second generation South Asians? Any advice?
I mean, just be open to anything and everything, and play as much as you can, and learn the basics, and choose good songs and good musicians to play them with.
Thank you, Sriram, for coming on my show. I really appreciate it. I'll end with a quote. One good thing about music: when it hits you, you feel no pain. Bob Marley. Well said. Thank you very much. All the best. Like I always say in the end, life is short. Have fun and have no regrets.